Jack Blackwood sat in the sleek, polished conference room of the Galactic Federation's diplomatic hall, his fingers tapping nervously against the surface of his glass tablet. The alien representatives around the table, with their glowing skin and shimmering eyes, murmured in soft voices, each one more incomprehensible than the last. His job, as Earth's chief diplomat, had always been to bridge the divide between humanity and the countless alien species in the galaxy. But today, this peaceful gathering would be shattered by one simple question. The chamber door slid open with a soft hiss, and the Zogoth delegation entered, their massive, muscular frames casting long shadows as they lumbered to their seats. Jack knew that the Zogoths were an ancient species, known for their brute strength and harsh, unrelenting nature. It was never easy negotiating with them. But today, he'd hoped for a breakthrough. The moment of silence that followed felt weighted. Jack's eyes darted to each of the Zogoths. The leader, Gorath, turned his piercing, multifaceted eyes to Jack and spoke, his voice deep and resonant, echoing in the large room. "Tell us, human," Gorath said, his words thick with curiosity. "Why do you fear cats?" The question hung in the air, shocking everyone into an eerie silence. Jack blinked, uncertain if he had heard correctly. Fear cats? He had dealt with dozens of sensitive topics, trade agreements, territorial disputes, energy resources, but this? This was unexpected. A nervous laugh bubbled up from Jack's throat. "Well, I don't think humans fear cats, exactly. I mean, there's some superstition, sure, but..." No, Gorath interrupted. "We have studied your species' behavior. Cats, as you call them, are revered by some of your people. Yet there is a strange fear that lingers. Why? Why would you fear such a small creature?" Jack shifted in his seat, uneasy. The Zogoths were well known for their analysis of human culture, but this felt oddly personal. He glanced toward his assistant, a quiet Nixie named Lyra, whose delicate blue fingers fidgeted with the edge of her robe. She was just as baffled as he was, and in her eyes, he could see the quiet plea, "Do something." Taking a breath, Jack leaned forward, his gaze steady. "What if I told you there was a cat who didn't just frighten humans, but conquered an entire alien world?" he asked. Gorath's expression shifted, his alien eyes narrowing. "You suggest a cat conquered an entire planet?" Jack nodded, the weight of the story beginning to settle on his shoulders. "Yes. And not just any planet. A world far beyond anything you could imagine. I'll tell you the tale. It's a tale of power, fearlessness, and how one small creature became more than just a pet." The Zogoth leader sat back, intrigued. "Proceed." Jack took a deep breath and allowed himself to think back to that fateful day, when it all began. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a diplomatic visit, an attempt to establish peace on a war-torn planet in a distant corner of the galaxy. But somehow, everything had changed the moment his cat, Whiskers, had set foot on alien soil. The memory flashed vividly in his mind. It was a world plagued by war, where two alien factions fought for control of a planet rich in resources. The people there were desperate, torn between two ideologies that had driven them to madness. Jack had been sent with a simple task: negotiate a ceasefire. It was supposed to be straightforward. Whiskers, as always, was by his side. The small, orange tabby had been his companion through thick and thin. But on this day, the cat was more than just a pet. As Jack strode into the war room of the alien leaders, Whiskers padded along beside him, her small paws making no sound against the metal floor. At first, the leaders barely noticed the cat, too focused on the looming conflict. But then, it happened. The tension in the room grew unbearable. One faction's leader, a tall, armored species called the Kothar, stood up, slamming his fist onto the table. He was shouting at the other side, demanding victory, demanding blood. Whiskers, calm and unbothered, walked to the center of the room. The Kothar's shout was silenced as the cat leaped onto the table and curled up in the middle, unfazed by the aggression around her. No one spoke. For a long, uncomfortable moment, all the leaders stared at the cat, their anger forgotten. And in that instant, it became clear, Whiskers had done what Jack could not. She had brought peace to the room. The Kothar lowered his fist, then slowly sat down, eyes wide with disbelief. The other leaders followed, their harsh words giving way to silence. Jack had never seen anything like it. A small, seemingly insignificant creature, brought order to chaos. Jack looked up, finding himself back in the present, surrounded by the intrigued faces of the Zogiths. They were waiting for him to continue, the question still hanging in the air. Why had they feared cats? Whiskers, Jack said, his voice steady now, didn't just stop a fight. She showed them something none of us had realized we needed to see. The strength in unity. The power in calm. He leaned back in his chair, meeting Goratha's gaze. And that, Jack said quietly, is why humans fear cats. Not because they are weak, but because they are far stronger than we ever realized. The air inside the alien council chamber was thick with tension, heavier than usual, as Jack Blackwood stood before the Zogoth leaders, his hands folded behind his back. Gorath, the hulking leader of the Zogiths, stared at him with unreadable eyes, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The room, usually filled with the hum of debate and alien voices, was eerily silent, as if they were all waiting for something monumental to happen. Your story, Gorath finally rumbled, his voice low, is fascinating. But now, you must prove that this cat, Whiskers, truly had the power to influence an entire world. Jack took a slow breath, trying to steady the nerves that prickled at the back of his neck. He had known this moment was coming. The Zogiths weren't known for their patience, and their trust wasn't easily earned. But Jack's words, Whiskers' actions, had sparked a seed of curiosity in them. Now, it was time to show that curiosity was more than just a passing intrigue. I can't prove it with technology or alien devices, Jack began, his voice steady. But I can tell you this, Whiskers didn't just stop a war. She did what we couldn't. She unified two factions on the brink of destroying each other. And that's where the true power of this cat lies. He paused, scanning the room. The Nixie scientist, Lyra, sat quietly at the far end, her blue skin almost blending into the shadows, her eyes glinting with a quiet but unwavering interest. She was the one who had first noticed the strange connection between Whiskers and the planet's energies, an energy none of them had ever thought to acknowledge. We didn't know what we were dealing with, Jack continued, the memory of that first encounter fresh in his mind. Whiskers led us through chaos, yes. But it wasn't just about strategy or diplomacy. It was about something deeper. Something instinctive. He glanced at Lyra, who shifted in her seat, her gaze flicking between Jack and the others. The memory surged forward again, the moment Whiskers had first stepped into the enemy war room, her orange fur glinting in the dim light of the foreign world. The factions, at war for decades, were at each other's throats. Leaders shouted, their voices like firecrackers in the air. And then, Whiskers had made her move. At first, Jack had thought it was a coincidence, maybe the cat was just curious. But as Whiskers casually jumped onto the table, turning her gaze toward the Kothar leader with a look that could only be described as knowing, the atmosphere changed. The once heated debate faltered. The Kothar, known for their unyielding brutality, faltered, his arms dropping to his sides in disbelief. The silence had spread like a ripple through the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Whiskers simply lay there, her tail twitching with an unspoken command. And then the Kothar, for the first time in his life, dropped his weapon. What the hell just happened? Jack had whispered to himself, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anything like it. Goratha's voice snapped Jack back to the present. You imply that the cat's presence alone halted the conflict? That is inconceivable. It wasn't just her presence, Jack replied, his voice low but resolute. It was her understanding. Her calm. It was the fact that she saw past the chaos to something more profound. He glanced around the room, meeting the gaze of each leader, each one skeptical but intrigued. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. The truth is, Whiskers has an ability we didn't understand at the time. She's connected to something deeper, something ancient within this universe. That's why the factions calmed down. It wasn't just a matter of winning a battle. It was a matter of something far more elusive. Lyra's voice broke through the silence. What do you mean by something deeper? Jack turned to her, his eyes narrowing with both frustration and awe. I'm not sure, but I think she tapped into the planet's own life force. She was attuned to the balance, and in a way that no one else could understand, she became the catalyst of change. Goratha's massive form shifted in his seat. The other leaders exchanged murmurs, their alien voices too soft to fully comprehend. The tension in the room thickened, as if the walls themselves were watching and waiting. Explain, Gorath demanded. Jack hesitated. He wasn't entirely sure how to explain what had happened on that world. There were things about Whisker's actions that defied logic, things that didn't align with known science, not even in the most advanced corners of the galaxy. But he had to try. Jack paused, considering his words. She didn't just stop a fight. She made the factions see something bigger than themselves. She made them realize they were fighting not for resources or land, but for something far more fragile, life itself. The silence in the room deepened. No one spoke for several moments, as if Jack's words were still sinking in. The Zogiths were known for their stubbornness. They respected power, but they respected wisdom even more. And in that moment, Jack saw a glimmer of understanding in Goratha's eyes, a shift, however subtle. You claim this cat changed the fate of an entire world, Gorath said, his voice quieter now. Then tell us, human, what can we learn from this creature? Jack's eyes flickered to Lyra, then back to the Zogiths. You can learn that sometimes, the greatest strength doesn't come from force. It comes from understanding. And from unity. For the first time since the meeting had started, Jack felt the weight of their skepticism begin to lift. The Zogiths were listening, not just to his words, but to the unspoken truth beneath them. As the council deliberated in the background, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whisker's influence had changed more than one world. And now, Jack was determined to uncover just how far that influence would spread. But in the back of his mind, he knew there was more to the story. More about Whiskers, more about the ancient powers she seemed to be connected to. And more about the future of not just humanity, but the galaxy itself. The room grew colder, despite the heat of the midday sun streaming through the crystalline windows. Jack Blackwood stood motionless in the middle of the Galactic Federation's vast observation room, his gaze fixed on the alien horizon stretching before him. It had been a day since the council meeting, and the questions that had been raised, about Whiskers and her strange power, still lingered in the air like an electric charge. Behind him, the soft hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the floor, but Jack's mind was far from the comforting noise. His thoughts were fixated on the moment he'd shared with the Zogoth leaders. Whiskers had turned the tide in the negotiations, but what had she truly done? And more importantly, why? The gentle shuffle of footsteps broke the silence, and Jack turned to see Lyra, the Nixie scientist, entering the room. Her delicate, azure-hued form glided toward him with an expression that blended curiosity and concern. You're still thinking about the council's reaction, aren't you? She asked, her voice soft yet penetrating. Jack nodded, rubbing his temples. I don't know what I expected, but something about their response doesn't sit right with me. They're intrigued, yes, but they still don't understand. No one does. Lyra tilted her head, her thin, violet eyes narrowing as she looked at him. It's not just them. Even you don't fully understand what happened on that planet. The way Whiskers calmed the factions, it was more than a mere diplomatic success. I saw something in her, a connection to the planet itself. Jack's gaze met Lyra's. She wasn't one to make wild claims, and the way she spoke now carried weight. What are you saying, Lyra? She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the window, as though considering how much to reveal. I think Whiskers tapped into something ancient, Jack. The planet's energy, its very life force. I've been studying the readings from the Council's scanning systems. There's an anomaly, a power source that resonates with the frequency of your cat. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Are you suggesting that Whiskers is connected to this planet's energy? Lyra nodded slowly, a rare uncertainty in her voice. Yes, but I believe it's not just this planet. Whiskers could be a conduit, a vessel for something far greater. Something beyond our understanding. Before Jack could respond, the door to the room slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing Gorath. The Zogoth leader entered, his massive form casting a shadow over the room. His eyes were sharp, his demeanor more restrained than Jack had expected. I heard your conversation, Gorath said, his voice deep and gravelly. You're beginning to realize what we suspected. There's something more to your cat than mere instincts. Jack exchanged a glance with Lyra, who nodded silently. What exactly are you suggesting, Gorath? Jack asked, crossing his arms. That Whiskers is some kind of weapon. Gorath's lips curled into a faint smile. Not a weapon. A force. One we are only beginning to comprehend. You see, humanity has always underestimated the potential of simple creatures, even those as insignificant as your cat. But the truth is, you possess a hidden power, one that many species, including my own, have long feared. Lyra stepped forward. We're not talking about just strength or aggression, Gorath. We're talking about something far more profound. Whiskers didn't just stop a war. She made the factions see a bigger picture, one that none of them could have seen without her. Gorath's eyes narrowed. I don't need a cat to show me how to conquer a planet. No, Jack interjected, his voice firm. But perhaps it's not about conquering. Maybe it's about uniting. Something you Zogoths have never truly understood. The room fell into a tense silence. Even Gorath seemed momentarily stilled, as if considering Jack's words. For all the bravado and military might the Zogoths wielded, unity was something they had always struggled with. They thrived on division and power, qualities that, Jack realized, had often led them to conflict rather than resolution. The question, Jack continued, is whether you're willing to understand what Whiskers has shown us. Not just a peaceful resolution, but a path forward that doesn't rely on domination or force. Gorath's massive shoulders shifted. Your optimism is noted, he said slowly, the tone of his voice carrying an edge of something deeper. But what of the other factions? What if they reject this path? Lyra stepped closer to Jack. That's what we need to understand. The power that Whiskers tapped into. It's not just about uniting opposing forces. It's about creating something new. A force of unity that can't be easily undone. Jack's heart raced as he realized the full scope of what Lyra was suggesting. Whiskers had unwittingly unlocked a doorway to something ancient, something bigger than their understanding of the universe. And now, they had to decide whether they would use that power to unite the galaxy, or let it slip away, unseen and untapped. I'm not sure where this will lead, Jack said, turning to Gorath. But we have to find out. For the sake of not just humanity, but for all of us. Gorath studied him for a long moment, and then, for the first time, he nodded. You've convinced me, human, he said gruffly. We will pursue this, but I warn you, this path will not be easy. Many will resist. And we may face enemies far more dangerous than any we've encountered before. Jack took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. We'll face them together. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. As the Zogoth leader turned to leave, Jack couldn't help but glance back at the stars outside the window. Whiskers had already changed the fate of one world. Now, it was time to see how far her influence would stretch. The command center buzzed with a quiet urgency, its sterile white walls reflecting the harsh, artificial light. Outside, the stars glimmered, distant and indifferent. Inside, however, the weight of the decision hung heavy over Jack Blackwood and his team. They had made their choice, to pursue the power Whiskers had unlocked. But now, that power was beginning to unravel in ways they hadn't expected. Jack stood at the center of the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The voices of his crew and the alien leaders filtered through his thoughts like static. Gorath and Lyra had joined him, their presence silent but palpable. The Zogoth leader's eyes, usually a fierce yellow, were now clouded with uncertainty. Lyra's cool, composed face was drawn tight with concern. "It's not just the factions anymore, is it?" Lyra spoke first, her voice a low murmur. She wasn't asking, it was more of a statement. Jack didn't turn around. "No. I've received reports from Earth. Other powers, off-world, are picking up on the same energy signature we detected. And they're not interested in peace." A low rumble from Gorath echoed through the room. "Let me guess. They want to harness it, exploit it for their own gain." Jack nodded, eyes darkening. "Exactly. They're already on their way here, hungry for whatever it is that Whiskers tapped into." Gorath's lip curled, his teeth sharp and yellow in the dim light. "So, your mission to unite the galaxy has become a race to control power. How fitting." Jack turned to him, his jaw tight. "You're not wrong. But it's not just about power. Whiskers didn't use this energy to gain an advantage, she used it to force them to see the bigger picture. This is about showing them that they're fighting for something that doesn't exist, the illusion of control." Lyra stepped forward, her soft features etched with anxiety. "And what happens when they don't see it, Jack? When they come for this power, what will we do then?" A moment of silence passed between them. Jack could feel the weight of her question settle in his chest. He wasn't sure how to answer. All he knew was that there was no turning back now. The path was set. "We defend it," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We show them the truth. We fight for something more than control." The sound of footsteps interrupted the moment. A figure entered the room, a human officer, looking every bit as weary as Jack felt. His uniform was wrinkled, a testament to the long hours of work, but his expression was sharp, determined. "Sir, the enemy fleet is closing in," the officer reported, his voice tight with urgency. "We estimate 20 minutes until they're in range." Jack turned to the officer, his mind racing. He had hoped they'd have more time, but it seemed that hope had been in vain. He looked at Lyra and Gorath, both silently watching him, waiting for the next move. "Prepare for defensive measures," Jack ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "I want every ship on standby. No one gets in without a fight." Gorath's grin widened. "Now that's more like the humans I've heard about." Jack didn't respond, his focus shifting back to the screen in front of him. He could see the shapes of the enemy ships now, flickering against the backdrop of stars, sleek and menacing. They were here. And they weren't coming for peace. Lyra stepped up beside him, her eyes scanning the readouts. "Jack," she said, her voice tight, "we can't just rely on brute force. If they understand the energy like we do, they'll disable our defenses long before we get the chance to fight back." Jack's stomach clenched. She was right. But what other choice did they have? "We need to use Whiskers," Jack said, the idea forming in his mind. "If we can channel the energy the way she did, we might stand a chance. We can't just sit back and hope they'll listen." "Channel the energy?" Lyra echoed, her voice skeptical. "Jack, we don't even understand it fully. We don't know what will happen if we try." "I'll take that risk," Jack replied firmly. "We've seen what happens when Whiskers taps into it. There's a power there we can't ignore." Gorath growled low in his throat. "You think a simple cat can save you now? The Zogoth Empire would never have relied on such weakness." Jack's gaze hardened. "Then it's a good thing we're not following the Zogoth way anymore." Lyra placed a hand on Jack's arm. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? If this doesn't work—" "I don't have a choice," Jack interrupted. "We don't have a choice. This is bigger than any of us." As the final countdown began, Jack felt a surge of determination course through him. The decision had been made. They would stand their ground. Not just for humanity's survival, but for the galaxy's future. The power they sought was not something to be hoarded or controlled. It was something to be shared, to be respected. The battle was moments away, and Jack knew that they would either succeed or fall together. But if they could unlock the full potential of Whisker's connection to the energy, perhaps they could tip the scales. Perhaps they could show the galaxy that unity, not domination, was the true path forward. "Get Whiskers," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's time." Lyra nodded, stepping back toward the door. As she moved, Jack turned to face the enemy ships, his gaze unwavering. The cat was the key. And if they were going to win, they had to believe that. Outside, the battle began. And for the first time, Jack didn't feel alone.